We'll call this session 2. We're gonna keep. Oh, shoot. I should have found my spot before I started. So today we're in the studio. I can't tell if I've got clay on my face or not. Swipe to unlock. Okay. So, we are with somebody we don't know in a workshop, and he's poking around to see if he can figure out what he knows or something. What else was there? He started opening little boxes at random. We're going to call this session 2, by the way. 3 teeth, small enough to be a human child's, with too much root left to have fallen out on their own. A pile of black pellets, which he only realized were fumets after he'd poked at them for a bit. Oh, I want to get rid of that. Okay. He poked at them for a bit with a finger and then pulled back in disgust. A button, a tiny golden key, the stub of a candle, the skull of a mouse, and an ornately carved black rock that nearly hummed with malice. 2 of the boxes were carefully sealed shut with wax. He couldn't remember what was in them, but he knew better than to disturb them. It was too much to have written notes to himself, it seemed. He resolved to write such notes to his future self. Then he realized how very damaging it could be if found by an enemy. Did he have enemies? Surely most dark wizards would have enemies. That was probably why he was in this situation in the first place. He leaned back and looked at the room around him. Papers were everywhere. Books, sheaves tied with dusty black and red ribbons, loose piles. It would take him a year or more to read it all. He wasn't sure he had a year. Eventually he was going to need to leave this room, and then someone was going to notice his predicament. What would they do when they learned the truth? Well, at the very least, he could try to burn them to death. He'd found the thought both comforting and not comforting at all. He spotted a jar, half buried under shrapnel and bird bones at the back of the desk, and felt his heart leap with excitement. Why? Somehow he'd been looking for this, and it was part of the routine. The jar was unlabeled, of course. He took a breath and unscrewed the lid. Inside crawled a nest of furry black caterpillars. They twisted and crawled over each other in a revolting manner. He felt vaguely nauseated. There was something wrong with them. As he looked closer, he realized they had no feet, nor even really bodies. They were just a stripe of hair, and then he burst into laughter tinged only slightly with hysteria. They were eyebrows. Great Terathax. He must do this all the time if he kept an entire jar of replacement eyebrows. The uncontrollable explosion thing, if not the memory thing. And who was the Great Terathax? He had a sudden flash of owl wings and hot breath and unquenchable hunger, and resolved to be more careful who he called on in the future. He picked up one by the edge and dangled it above his face, hesitating. It twisted and yearned towards his forehead. He swallowed and laid it on the skin. It crawled across his face. The back of his neck was crawling in response, and then sunk tiny claws in. He cursed involuntarily, and the entire bouquet burst into flames. This time, at least, he remembered the spell for putting out small fires. And then he grabbed another eyebrow, gritting his teeth. It was no less painful, but at least less surprising. He flipped up the mirror cloth to check his work. He looked a good deal less goofy and more saturnine, with the eyebrows firmly in place. There was nothing to be done about the fat around his chin, though, without rather more involved spell. He wondered why he hadn't cast it. He wondered how much denial his past self had been in. His stomach rumbled. He wondered what his past self did to get a decent meal. He was thirsty, too, which was a more pressing matter, and eventually he was going to want some clothes that weren't shredded, and maybe a bath, and a few other needs that were gradually making themselves more apparent. He couldn't stay in this windowless room forever. There was just one door. He pressed an ear against it. Someone was humming softly and badly out of tune. The owner of the scratchy voice, perhaps? He couldn't let anyone know that there was a problem. His memory might return at any moment, and he was certain that any plans he might have had would be thoroughly ruined by an admission of weakness. He owed himself that, not to destroy whatever it is he had been working on, not to mention the potential consequences if it became known. Rivals, apprentices, he might even have a nemesis or two. Dark wizards weren't known for their friendly relations, he was certain, or their benevolence around the countryside. He didn't want to die by fireball or by pitchfork. He tried to imagine how a dark wizard might act. Aloof, certainly. Angry, perhaps. He drew himself up. Distracted, yes, that might work. He was preoccupied by his research and very important, and he had little attention to spare for things beneath him, such as names or where food came from. That was for underlings. If he had a firefighting team, he must certainly have some sort of cook, because he wasn't sure how to make more than a sandwich, and he really wasn't sure where he would obtain the pieces of said sandwich. Would he be the type to be absent-mindedly carrying papers and keep working as he went, or lock everything up? It seemed safer to lock it up. There was a large iron key hanging next to the door that glowed faint. Oh, he did start it good. A large iron key hanging next to the door that glowed faintly as he picked it up. It went with the lock, he could feel. Let's try that again. He took one last deep breath and opened the door. There was no one there. And then he looked down. Around waist height stood he wasn't sure what it was. It wore armor. The armor seemed to be intended for someone else, as it didn't fit particularly well. The helmet seemed improbably large, given the guard's lack of stature. A proud red feather had once added height, but it had snapped in half at some point. Through the gaps where the helmet failed to meet the breastplate, the neck appeared green, with a couple of warts that sported impressively long hairs. Farther down, he could see an equally improbably shaped codpiece. He wasn't sure if that hinted at vanity, a lack of appropriately sized armor, or biological facts about an as yet unidentified species that he did not actually want to know. My lord! The mismatched armor collection pulled itself up into something approximating attention. Need help with fires now? The guard gestured hopefully at the row of buckets, some of water and some of sand, lined up next to him in the hallway. No, he said. He had meant to ask about food, or maybe a privy, but suddenly lost his nerve. Maybe it would be easier to find it himself. Carry on. He had no idea how to address the spiky little creature, whose halberd seemed entirely too tall for someone of such height to wield effectively. The creature seemed to sense his confusion, which was not a promising start to his charade. I be new captain of the guard. What had happened to the old captain of the guard? Something better discovered on a full stomach. Or maybe better just left alone. That's, excellent. Just keep on guarding. The captain saluted, misjudged the placement of the inherited helmet, and gave himself a solid whack on the forehead. The creature staggered a little, and so he turned away, determined to spare them both the embarrassment. The stone passageway was badly lit, with torches that guttered but did not smoke, casting eerie shadows. He must have enchanted them that way. It seemed like it would have been just as easy to cast ever-burning torches that burned steadily, but he supposed it wouldn't have been as atmospheric. Turning a corner, he nearly collided with a shorter, balding man dressed in dark red. The man recoiled and quickly suppressed terror before slapping an obsequious expression on his olive face. He didn't trust that expression any farther than he could throw the oily bastard, which he doubted was very far. Arm-strengthening exercises clearly had not been part of his personal daily routine. My lord? The man in red fawned. Steward, perhaps? Major domo? Someone with an urge to please, certainly. It was a pity he didn't use an actual name. There would be no escaping talking to someone, it seemed. Angry, important, he reminded himself. He narrowed his eyes. Report! That seemed innocuous enough. And it seemed to do the trick. The princess has finally ceased her demands, as you predicted. The steward's voice oozed satisfaction. The goblins watching her have reported that she merely cries in the corner of her cell. She refuses to eat, however. It might be necessary to use another nourishment smell on her. The man's face glowed at the prospect, disturbingly excited. He nearly lost his breath at the influx of new information. He had goblins. He had, most likely, just been talking to a goblin. He had a princess. He had no idea why he had a princess, but he didn't much like the idea of the steward anywhere near her, and he hadn't even met the girl yet. Or at least he didn't remember her yet. Princess Alicia's father has offered a small fortune for her return, the steward continued. Well, that seemed like a fairly good reason. Tempting, he said, in as neutral a voice as he could muster. What would he do with that much money? Some more practical clothes in a castle with a lot more natural light, perhaps? What was his past self planning to do with it? More ugly furniture, probably. The steward cackled. As his master appeared to be in a good humor, he was clearly willing to play along. It would be, wouldn't it, my lord? I wish I could see the old fool's face when he discovers the true plan. Oh dear, there was a plan. Of course there was a plan. Perhaps you shall, he said magnanimously. The blood drained from the man's face immediately. That had apparently been a threat. His stomach clenched. He needed to figure out what his plan was and how far along it was as soon as possible. But right now he needed his steward friendly and helpful, not terrorized. He forced a small smile that he did not remotely feel. There are such things as magic mirrors, you know, he said, surprised that he did know such a thing. I may still have a use for you, my faithful servant. Yes, thank you, my lord, the steward babbled in relief. It was kind of funny, to be honest. He didn't like the man at all, and watching him tremble had a certain entertainment value. He wondered if that's why he had kept him around. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. He cut the steward's declarations of gratitude off with a gesture, and the man fell mercifully silent. Now, where were we? I've rather lost track of time in my work. Would you like to visit the princess now that she's in a more docile mood? The steward suggested after a moment. He must not be consulted often. A thin sheen of sweat had popped out on his forehead. Perhaps in a bit, he allowed. He wasn't sure that he did want to visit her. There was a certain desperate curiosity, but he had no idea what he would say to the woman. I think perhaps a change of clothes might be in order. He raised his arms with their tattered sleeves. Ah, yes, the steward affected surprise. He couldn't possibly have not noticed until that point. Lead on, he said, giving the phrase lead on, he said, giving the phrase a sardonic twist, because there was no way that he did not know the way around his own castle, of course. The steward swallowed and turned. The man did not particularly seem to enjoy having his master at his back. Perhaps he should pretend a new tendency for paranoia, or develop it for real. He wasn't sure if he wanted the steward at his own back. Surely the little man could only be pushed so far before fear and humiliation made him snap. Or maybe he merely turned it on all the prisoners. His chamber turned out to be not too far. The steward threw open the door, pausing to see if his master wanted to proceed. He merely raised an eyebrow, and the steward scurried in. He wasn't sure what the steward was afraid he was going to do, and it felt dangerous to use threats he did not understand, but surely not as dangerous as letting a coward sadist suddenly discover that his tormentor was vulnerable. What if his servant decided that a small treasury sounded good enough for him? He was riding a tiger, it seemed, with no way off. And this was just the second person he'd met. As he stepped inside the chamber, he was dismayed, but not surprised, to see the decorating scheme continued throughout his living spaces. At least his taste was consistent. He faced a monstrosity of a four-poster bed, a hulking thing of black wood draped with blood-red velvet. More obscene carvings climbed each bedpost. It was tacky. The chamber boasted a window, at least, although the shutters were barred. Instead of torches, he found clean-burning candles, to his intense relief. He almost tried to thank a deity and then realized there was no one he felt safe thanking and shuddered to a halt in his own thoughts. I'm going to just check and see if I can see the end of the chapter yet. It seems like it is still a ways to the end of the chapter, and we're at about 15 minutes now, so I'm going to mark this and do this again another day. Bye.